Hello. Welcome to Communicating Effectively with Children at All Stages. My name is Kelly Rawl, and I am the coordinator of family engagement as well as pre-kindergarten. I want you to know that we are very proud of you for taking this step and watching this video. And you must be curious about things that you can do to improve the communication with your children, as well as in your other relationships, for instance, with your spouse or your friends or your coworkers. The things that we talk about today are going to be universally helpful. It is really important for us, though, at the department level, for you to sign in and let us know that you have participated in this video. And the link is there at the bottom of your screen. And if you would, either type it into your web browser, open a new window and type it in, or make a note of it so that you can do it after the video. The web address is https://bit.ly/328COMMEFF. That's https://bit.ly/328COMMEF. Again, if you have any questions about this session or any other session of Parent Academy, or if you are in need of support for your family, please use our contact information here. We'd also like for you to know, my department and I we'd like for you to know that we have all been fully trained by the writers of Practical Parent Education so that we can share this information with you. The information is solidly based on research, and we just want you to know that we are not claiming to be that we have been perfect parents in the past, now, or in the future. And now that you hear that ding, I just want to apologize for that ahead of time. That is something that my computer does, and I do not seem to be able to turn it off, despite my best efforts, as well as with help from my friends. No one has been able to turn it off. And it is a little bit annoying, but you eventually learn to tune it out. So please forgive me for that little ding. Now, going back to us not claiming to be experts, I just want you to know that we've all made plenty of mistakes, and that's how we learn things. We learned many lessons from being parents ourselves, and I'm actually raising a granddaughter right now, and so I think it's just called trial by fire, if you know what I mean. So we're going to go ahead and get started, and I hope that you will find this information fairly simple to understand and very helpful. So think about this from a different perspective. Remember when your kiddos were little and you heard them crying from all the way from the other room, then you knew that they were hungry and you needed to get a bottle, or you knew that that's an angry cry and they must have a dirty diaper or a wet diaper. So we could tell how our kids were feeling just by the way they cried. However, many studies have shown, and I'm sure we can all attest to this from personal experience, the older our kids get, the more difficult it becomes to understand what they're saying and to communicate with them in a meaningful way. And as teens, even as children even grow into their adolescent stages and their teenage years, um, communication in itself often becomes a barrier to having a good relationship with your student. I have a teenager in my house, and um, well, we'll talk about that later. Think about this. Have you ever heard your child say these things, or do you suspect that they're thinking them? I wish I could talk to my parents, but they never seem to understand. My parents are always so busy, they don't seem interested in what I have to say. Oh, ouch. How can I get my parents to understand that things are different today from when they were growing up? Oh my gosh, I remember actually telling my parents, that was then, this is now. There's actually a book with that title, and I think that's where I picked it up. My parents do all the talking. Why can't they just listen sometimes? Oh, ouch again. I mentioned before that I have a granddaughter that I'm raising. She's almost 15, and she doesn't tell me that I do all the talking, but if I say, hey, what's all the attitude about, or whatever, or if we're already in a discussion, then she may stand there with her arms crossed in front of her body and tapping her foot and rolling her eyes. And she says, is this going to be another lecture? Well, you know what? She communicates loud and clear with me when she says that. That tells me that I need to stop my approach right now because this isn't going to work. And I need to listen. So when she says that, I try to say, well, no, it's not going to be another lecture, but I am here to listen. So why don't you tell me how you're feeling? And sometimes that works. And sometimes we have to continue, or sometimes we have to go to our respective corners and chill out for a little bit. And then we can have a calm conversation. So your children probably say something that you could quote when you're in the throes of these kinds of conversations. So I think that things like this can be heard in our homes as well as all across the country. Our trainer said we might want to get samples from you of what what kids say in our community, so they sound more realistic. But I think that you get the gist. Now, from a parent's perspective, you probably recognize some of these thoughts because you've had them. I know I've had them. Sometimes I might think, I know something is bothering my granddaughter, but she just shrugs her shoulders and says nothing is wrong. Or it seems like every conversation we have ends up in an argument. We can't just talk anymore. I feel like I have a stranger living in my house. Or my daughter seems depressed and angry, but she won't open up. And about this last one, just remember that could just as easily say, my son seems depressed and angry, but he won't open up. And it's because it's important to recognize that depression is happening in more and more boys at a much higher rate than it ever has been before. And it's possible that we're just now recognizing it or validating it now more than we have before. But depression is an illness that affects boys just as much as it does girls. Oh. So we know these things are true. Communication isn't easy. It's whether you're talking about 2-year-olds or 18-year-olds, struggles with communication happen. We tend to communicate the way our parents communicated with us. People are not always on the same communication page. And when communication fails, this is the kicker right here. When communication fails, our children are the ones to suffer. Our kids, look at that little boy. He's the one suffering. You can tell he has serious things on his mind. And look at the young lady at the top. She's taking a selfie, perhaps to post on social media. Social media has changed the way people communicate. And sometimes or very often, it's important for us to put our technology down so that we can have a legitimate and meaningful conversation with our children or our students. So why does this happen? Why do we struggle so much with communication? I'm sure there are lots of reasons, and you can come up with a list just as easily as I can. But sometimes we know we fall into the trap of maintenance talk. And I kind of think about this as being manager talk. Do you have homework? Have you brushed your teeth? You know, those are just things, those are part of the business of having a family, and they all have to be taken care of. But somewhere in there, we have to leave room for meaningful conversation. Then we know we have power conversations where we as parents control the conversation, and it ends up being, do what I say, period. And then it's important for us to remember that children's communication skills are not fully developed. So that frontal cortex in the brain actually does not fully develop until people are in their early 20s. And so it is really important that we recognize that their brains have not developed completely. So their ability to use their words and communicate and understand the logic that you might be talking about, they may not have the ability to understand what you're saying, and they may not be able to use their words effectively, certainly not at an adult level. And then, of course, it all comes down to time. We all have demanding responsibilities and schedules that interfere with effective communication. So there's no doubt about those 4 sentences. Communication is, however, the single most important tool that we use to make connections with other people. I mean, it is, it's critical that we learn to use effective communication strategies. And communication was defined by Webster as the act of getting a message from point A to point B and back. So meaningful communication is a two-way street. And it's not just about conveying the information, thoughts, or ideas, but it is about back and forth of exchanging in a back and forth exchange of ideas. So we do have 3 main tools in our tool belt that we use to send messages, and we'll talk more about those shortly. But unfortunately, for many families, communication becomes, where are your shoes? What time is your soccer game? Go finish your homework. Don't forget to brush your teeth. And those are important communications, but they're very superficial. And that's not the kind of communication that we're talking about right now. Gradually, through the years, many families lose the ability to communicate at a deeper level, the level of feelings and emotions. And you can't have a close relationship with another person unless you can communicate at this deeper level. So true family communication needs to be more than conveying facts and information. Listen to this quote. When crew and captain understand each other to the core, it takes a gale and more than a gale to put their ship ashore. These are a few lines from Rudyard Kipling's poem called Together. And it's so very true. Listen to it again. When crew and captain understand each other to the core, it takes a gale and more than a gale to put their ship ashore. This is the type of communication that families need. This will enable you to develop close, trusting relationships, and it is the kind of communication that is going to help get you through stressful and difficult times. And we know we've had plenty of difficult times over the last couple of years. COVID has changed the way we do business in our families, in our schools, in our communities. And certainly communication has been a key component of these difficult years. So we know that communication should not just be power communication. It needs to go deeper. It needs to include talking about your thoughts and your feelings. And remember, you can't have a close relationship unless you go deeper. So think about this. What characteristics or qualities would you look for in a person if you were about to divulge your most personal thoughts and feelings? What are those qualities you'd want to see in a person if you're going to share your deep, dark secrets with them? Well, I can pretty much predict that the qualities you would look for are similar to the qualities that I would look for. So that's going to be things like honesty and confidentiality, and we'll come back to that in just a minute, but trust and the ability to be a good listener. And so just think about this. Those are the same things that your children are going to look for in you. If they're going to talk to you, they need to have that close relationship with you that will enable them to trust you, to share their feelings with you as the parent. And that's very important. Now, remember I mentioned confidence. So sometimes my granddaughter will say, well, don't tell him, he might sit there and make evil eyes at boys if I like them and he knows who they are. But things children tell us in confidence have to be evaluated by us as the adults in the situation when things they tell us indicate warning signs or red flags. If they're anything that indicate that a child is in danger or even the friend of a child is in danger, if they tell you that they're cutting or that a friend of theirs is using drugs or another friend of theirs might be considering suicide. These are things that as adults, we just can't keep confidential. Those are things that we have to address right away. So if my granddaughter's or my own daughter's friend is considering suicide, then I'm going to want to call that family and say, hey, I know we don't know each other that well, but our children are really good friends, and it sounds like Sophie has confided in my child that they might be feeling really down right now, and you might want to talk with them and find out what kind of extra support they need. So these are just things that we have to remember, that when you're talking about keeping things a child tells you in confidence, that we do have responsibilities as adults, and sometimes we have to break those confidences. Now, the question is, how do we really communicate, and what are the tools that we use? So we have three main tools of communication. One is body language, another is tone of voice, and the last one is our spoken words. And I would add a fourth one, our actions. So in this pie chart, you can tell that 55% of our message is actually conveyed by our body language. And remember that picture that we saw earlier in the presentation of the young lady who was rolling her eyes, had her arms crossed, and she might even be tapping her toe. Well, this child she's sending a message loud and clear. You say whatever you want, I'm not listening. It's like that commercial that we used to see on TV. La, 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 I'm not listening, I'm not listening. Well, that's the message that that young lady is sending to whomever is talking to her. Tone of voice is very important, 38%. And I would say tone of voice it might even be of greater importance in communication. You know, you can always tell if someone is copying an attitude with you, or if they are being patronizing, or if they're talking down to you, or if they're raising their voice, or if they disapprove. You can hear that in a person's voice, and that sends a message in and of itself. And then finally, the spoken word is really only boils down to 7% of the message that you're trying to say with your words. That's kind of shocking, because it's not, that might not be the percentage that we want to be received. And we might not mean to send messages with those other two, with our body language and our tone of voice, but people on the receiving end of your communication, they read you loud and clear. Now, we know there are some barriers to communicating with others. And you know these already, just based on what we've already talked about and from your personal experience. Look at eye contact. Eye contact can be tricky. You might use too much eye contact. You might not use enough contact, but eye contact is important. I know that if I sit there and scroll through my phone while you're talking to me, that tells people that I'm not listening to them, that they don't care about what I have to say, or I don't care what they have to say. All of these things are things that we do to inhibit communication, and they're actually our own fault. Unless we stop ourselves from doing these things, then we're not going to get the desired results that we want with our children, which is a good relationship where we can communicate effectively and thus improve our family life. So let's think about communication in a different way. We're going to use some physical objects to symbolize different types of communication, or the effectiveness of our communication. So this is how it's going to work. Now, if we were in person, we might do a demonstration of this, but we really aren't going to be able to do that in a video like we're doing today. So think about this first object. We all see that's a soccer ball. Now, pretend I throw the soccer ball to you, or kick the soccer ball to you, and it goes way over your head. So that soccer ball is my message. And if it's going over your head, then I'm either talking above you, or I'm sending you a message that you just can't understand because I'm using too high of a vocabulary, or a lot of technical terms, or unknown abbreviations. So what you're saying is, and when you're thinking about communicating with your child, then what you're saying is beyond their head or their logic. Their brain just can't understand what you're saying. Right? So that's the soccer ball going over your head. Now, if you throw the soccer ball too low, then you're talking down to your child. So that means that you're implying that they're stupid, or they don't they must be crazy if they don't understand what you're saying and do what you want them to do. So throwing the ball too low is not going to help you communicate your message. Now, if you throw the ball too far to the side, then your child isn't going to be able to catch the ball. And then, so you're not really sending your message directly to them. You're sending it out way out to the side, and they're going to wonder what you're talking about. They're not going to receive your message. And you, as the speaker, might be avoiding what you really need to say. And then the last thing we'll say about a soccer ball is that if you throw the ball to somebody and they have their back turned to you, then you're communicating with them without their full attention. You're trying to communicate with them without their full attention. There's no eye contact there. And so good communication usually involves eye contact between both parties. You know, when somebody looks away when they tell you something, they might be feeling uncomfortable. Or if they're sneering at you, then they might be laughing at you. So eye contact is very important. Let's think about throwing another object. These are cotton balls. Have you ever tried to throw a cotton ball? It doesn't go very far, does it? And when you hold a cotton ball in your hand or your fingers and you try to squish it, it's very squishy. It's not firm. So this symbolizes messages that lack firmness. They don't go very far. They're just kind of soft and maybe even implied, kind of when you're talking between the lines and the other person has to read between the lines. Now let's look at ping pong balls. If I had a whole bucket of ping pong balls and I start throwing them to you or at you, one right after the other, and you're bombarded with messages or with ping pong balls, then that just symbolizes excessive talking, lecturing, and nagging. Just one comment right after the other, telling them what to do, explaining why this is bad and why it's not going to be a good choice and those kinds of things. Then I'm sure you recognize this. It's not a ball, but it's a pine cone. I spent a lot of time in East Texas, and I know for a fact that if somebody throws a pine cone at you, it's going to hurt. And pine cones are prickly, and they in fact symbolize messages that hurt. They're full of criticism and put downs and name calling and teasing about sensitive issues. So throwing pine cones is really not fighting fair. And then the last thing that we have is a tennis ball. If you throw a tennis ball firmly to another person, they're going to be able to catch it and throw it back to you. So if you throw, this symbolizes communication that is firm, but it feels safe and non-threatening and non-judgmental. So these are all symbols of things that represent different kinds of communication. And in several cases, they symbolize barriers to communication. So if you watched one of the very first practical parent education session that we offered, then that was called Understanding Your Family System as a Whole. And we talked about 4 different styles of parenting. And we had physical objects that described all of those as well. So the first, so we're going to talk about the purpose of this part of our discussion is to help you refresh your memory about what kind of parenting style you use And then for you to reflect on that and think, what kind of communication, what message is my parenting style actually communicating to my child? Because your parenting style does send messages to your child every single day. So the first object that we use is a rock. And a rock symbolizes an authoritarian style of parenting. And that means that um, it's where communication and standard operating procedure is very well defined. Um, it's my way or the highway. There are strict rules. There's very strong consequences, very strict consequences, and children are held very accountable for their choices. So this is the rock. It's not firm. I mean, it is so firm and it doesn't budge. You can't squeeze it. Then we have a marshmallow style of parenting. This actually represents the permissive parent. So, okay, do what I want, do whatever you want. There's no accountability. Children can, with permissive parents, can actually manipulate them into doing what they want them to do. And so it's almost the exact opposite of an authoritarian household. Now, the next one is a bubble, and this symbolizes our uninvolved parents. And keep in mind that parents can be physically present, but not mentally or emotionally present. So an uninvolved parent might not actually be there physically at all. And there are a lot of reasons for why this might happen. Remember that we're not saying that any of these styles are good or bad. We just want you to think about each of these styles and identify which one most closely resembles what happens in your home. So sometimes an uninvolved parent might actually be someone who works out of town a lot, or you work in town, but your hours are such that you're just not home when your children are home and awake, and it prohibits you from being able to have a healthy relationship with your children. It might also be that someone in the family, one of the parents is gone because they are ill, or they have to care for someone else in the family who is ill. So there are a lot of reasons why an uninvolved parenting style might be in place. But in this particular case, sometimes children actually end up taking on the role of the parents, and sometimes they end up taking care of their parents. So if you're an uninvolved parent, or maybe your spouse is, or someone you know is, then those are things to consider. The last object that we're going to look at is the tennis ball. And we know from our other example, tennis balls are non-threatening. You can squeeze them, and they give a little bit when you squeeze them. They bounce. This is the parenting style that has structure. We know it's a ball, but we can squeeze it. It has some flexibility, and this represents the ability for children to have choices within reason. So it's not as strict of a household as the authoritarian household, but it is more flexible. Okay, so some of the rules might not be as strict, or some of the consequences may not be as strong. So now let's look at what kind of message that sends to our children. So if I am the authoritarian parent, then I'm using one-way communication, and sometimes this communication lacks direction. And so communication is sacrificed because we're always giving directions. So this is, I'm telling you it's your night to do the dishes, go do the dishes. If you don't do the dishes, you lose your telephone for the rest of the evening. So this is one-way communication, and it's my way or the highway. If you're the permissive parent, then you might not be holding the child accountable for the choices that they make. And sometimes the child doesn't have to be accountable because you're always right there with them and you're not letting them make any mistakes. Or you're letting them make mistakes and then there's no feedback and no problem solving for them to figure out, for children to deal with their mistakes. If you have an uninvolved parent in the house, then that really just shuts down communication and it sends the message that I'm not interested, or maybe even I don't care, or I don't love you. And then if you are the authoritative parent, then that means you have a more open style of communicating. And this style encourages expression of feelings, emotions, and ideas. And that is the kind of communication ultimately that we would want. So the purpose of this conversation is for you to think about what kind of parenting style do you currently have in your household? And then for you to, after you've identified it, then for you to ask yourself, am I sending the message that I really want to send to my kids? And if it's not, then this is your chance to start making changes. So just remember, you may have a relationship with your child that is on rocky ground right now, but that relationship can be restored by earning trust with a more open style of communication and building in those opportunities for listening and talking to your children at a deeper level. Okay. So this is one thing that you can do to improve the communication with your children. Examine your parenting style, identify your parenting style, and then ask yourself, is this sending the message that I want to send to my children? And if it's not, then this is your chance to make changes. So we know that successful communication depends on your ability to listen, not only to what is being said, but to what is not being said. And it is the ability to communicate ideas, feelings, and emotions in a non-threatening way. And you also need the ability to accept and understand another person's feelings. So it's really hard sometimes when people are telling you how they feel. And our first response is sometimes, well, you shouldn't feel that way. Well, unfortunately, we don't have any other way to feel. So we don't want to send the message that your feelings are wrong. We need to be able to accept how other people feel. So one strategy that you can use at home is called reflective listening. And in reflective listening, this is the ability to bounce back to someone what they've already told you about how they feel. So reflective listening works best when when you're talking with someone that you have a relationship with. If you don't have a relationship with that person, then it can sound patronizing. So you have to be careful about that. It happens at 3 levels. First is the content level. This is where you summarize or bounce back to the other person what they've said in your own words. So if your child really wants to go to the concert and you've said no, and they're just saying how unfair you are and that all their friends are getting to go and all that jazz, then you can say, geez, I can tell you really want to go to the concert. Or I can tell that going to the concert is really important to you. Sometimes bouncing back exactly what they've said to you sends them a very clear message that you really do understand why they're upset or why they feel the way they do. So sometimes that's very important because you're showing, not just saying that you understand, you're demonstrating that you understand by repeating back to them what they just said to you. So good listening involves listening without interrupting and being empathetic and showing that you understand. Sometimes you might have to say it in a questioning manner. Let me see if I got this right. You feel like blah, blah, blah. Or uh, did I get this right? Is that right? Repeat back what they said and then say, am I correct? Did I get it right? Okay, so again, the purpose of reflective listening at the content level is to show your child that you understand their feelings. Level 2 involves clarifying thoughts and naming emotions. You can use reflective statements. So you feel blank because blank. When you're practicing reflective listening at the second level, you want to ask questions to clarify or because you're curious, but not to drive the conversation. This is not the time to give advice or to try to be their therapist. It's not the time to tell your story about when you felt the same way. This is not the time to try and fix them or to make them feel better. You have to set your own feelings aside at this point and be a good listener for them. And at the third level, reflective listening is where the person is actually able to distill meaning, and you're able to help them distill this meaning. And that means that you help them express what all this means to them. So an example might be you feel frustrated because you don't have complete freedom over your own life, or it frustrates you that you have to follow rules that you disagree with, which makes you feel powerless over your own life. So when you're doing that, when you say these kinds of things back to your child, then you are demonstrating that you understand how they feel. And then sometimes when you do that, it comes to them that, yes, that's exactly how I feel. Maybe they couldn't have put it into words by themselves. They aren't always able to name and identify their own feelings. So reflective listening like this sounds something like these are some of the things you might say. So from your point of view, blah, 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 or it sounds like you're feeling A and B, or it seems like, or it might be that. And so you're helping them find meaning in how they're feeling. But remember, you're not advising them and you're not telling them what to do and you're not fixing it for them. So using reflective listening it doesn't come naturally to us. So you have to practice it and you have to try it out. Start with the level 1. Oh, going to the concert must be really important for you, important to you. So remember, start small and then build up to reflective listening at that deeper level. But it is all about building or increasing your ability to have conversations, deep, meaningful conversations with your child about their feelings and their emotions. So we're going to wrap this up really quick. And I'm just going to read a quick Irma Bombeck column to you. You might have heard of Irma Bombeck. She had a column in a New York newspaper, and it was called The Etiquette Lesson. And I think it was a New York newsletter, but I could be wrong about that. So She said on TV, a child psychologist said parents should treat their children as they would treat their best friends, with courtesy, dignity, and diplomacy. I have never treated my children any other way, I thought to myself. But later that night, I thought more about it. Suppose our good friends, Fred and Eleanor, came over to dinner, and I treated them like this. Well, it's about time you two got here. What have you been doing? Dawdling? Shut the door, Fred. Were you born in a barn? So, Eleanor, how have you been? I've been meaning to have you over for ages. Fred, take it easy on the dip or you'll ruin your dinner. Heard from any of the gang lately? We got a card from the Martins there in Fort Lauderdale again. What's the matter, Fred? You're fidgeting. It's down the hall, first door on the left. And I don't want to see a towel in the middle of the floor when you're finished either. So, how are your children? If everybody's hungry, we can go into the dining room and have dinner. You all go wash up and I'll start dishing up the food. Eleanor, don't tell me your hands are clean. I saw you playing with the dog. Fred, you sit there. Eleanor, you sit there. And you only get a half a glass of milk because you know how you are when it comes to milk. You spill it all the time. You don't what? You don't like cauliflower? Have you ever tried it? Well, try a spoonful. If you don't like it, I won't make you finish it. But if you don't try it, you can forget about having dessert. Now, what were we talking about? Oh, yes, the Grubers. They sold their house and they took a beating. But Eleanor, don't talk with food and use your napkin. At that moment in my fantasy, my son walked into the room. I said, how nice of you to come see me. And he said, what did I do now? So just know that we might get caught up in those, what do they call it, maintenance talk with our kids. But if we treated our friends the way that we treat our children sometimes, and I'm guilty of it, I'm talking about myself just like you are, like you might be. I'm not pointing any fingers, certainly. But just think about it. If we talk to our friends the way we speak to our kids, how, what kind of messages are we sending to our kids? So after today, what I want you to do is think to yourself and listen to yourself as you communicate with your children. Watch for those closed doors, like those times when you're talking down to your student or when you try to fix all their problems. Listen for subtle, unspoken messages from your children and practice the reflective listening skills that I shared with you tonight. And when your child wants to talk, make yourself available because that's the main thing. That just shows that you care. If you stop what you're doing so that you can listen to your child, that's a great message to them. That's what they want to hear. My granddaughter sometimes will send me a text. We have a 2-story house. And sometimes she'll say, Lala, can you come here? I need to talk to you about something. And so I put my phone down and I go upstairs and we have a conversation. And granted, sometimes she just wants to show me something she found on Amazon that she'd really like. But other times, she's having an issue with a friend or there's a problem at school or, something important. And we are able to have a more meaningful conversation. So I just want to encourage you to think about some of the things that I've shared with you today. And I want to try to implement a couple of things. And remember, if you need to make changes in a relationship, if you need to repair a relationship, it's never too late to start. Just always start small. Try with reflective listening. Try making yourself available if they want to talk. Try treating them with a little more dignity and respect. And then try something else and just keep adding those strategies or implementing those strategies a little bit at a time. And before you know it, your relationship will be better. It will be better than you ever thought it could be. So on that note, I am just going to remind you to please sign in on our sign-in sheet. It is an online Google form, and it is available to you at https://bit.ly/328 COMMEF. Thank you very much. I'm going to leave this screen up on the, I'm going to leave this slide up on the screen for just a minute. And I hope that you have a great rest of the school year, a wonderful summer, and that you just work hard to improve the communication in your family. Thank you very much. Have a blessed rest of the school year.